In the spring of 2019, a couple from the United States traveled to Switzerland to celebrate their honeymoon. They had recently married in a small ceremony attended by close family and friends. The bride, a transgender woman in her late 20s, had always dreamed of visiting Europe with her partner. Switzerland, with its lakes, mountains and quiet towns, was chosen as their destination for rest and celebration. The groom, a man in his early 30s, appeared excited about starting a new chapter in life. Friends recalled him as private but polite, while the bride was described as outgoing and hopeful for the future. The couple arrived in Zurich at the end of May, planning to spend 2 weeks visiting popular sites, staying in hotels and enjoying the countryside. At first, everything seemed normal. They shared photos online showing themselves smiling near famous landmarks. No one suspected that beneath the surface, tension was slowly building. Within days, what began as a joyful trip would turn into a crime that shocked both their families and the public. The couple at the center of this story were Emily and David. Emily was a 28-year-old transgender woman who had lived in the Midwest of the United States most of her life. Friends described her as kind, cheerful, and eager to build a stable future. She worked as a graphic designer for a small company, and outside of work, she enjoyed traveling, cooking, and photography. For Emily, her marriage symbolized a new beginning, a chance to live openly and happily with the person she loved. David, her husband, was 32 years old. He worked in construction and was known by co-workers as quiet but reliable. He did not share much about his private life, but he seemed proud when he announced his marriage. To those around him, the relationship appeared like any other. Friends and relatives believed he was ready to settle down and start a family. The couple had met 3 years earlier through mutual friends. Their relationship developed steadily, moving from casual dates to living together. During that time, Emily was open about her background with close friends, but she did not always share every detail with new acquaintances. In her daily life, she wanted to be treated simply as a woman without extra questions. When they decided to marry, Emily hoped David accepted her fully. She trusted that he wanted the same kind of future she did. For the wedding, they kept the ceremony small, with only a handful of guests. Photos from the day showed them smiling, exchanging rings, and celebrating with a simple dinner afterward. Soon after the wedding, Emily suggested a honeymoon in Europe. She had long admired the beauty of Switzerland from travel magazines and online videos. Snow-covered mountains, green valleys, and quiet towns seemed perfect for a romantic holiday. David agreed and they booked flights to Zurich. From there, they planned to visit popular tourist areas such as Lucerne, Interlaken, and Lake Geneva. When the couple landed in Switzerland in late May, they appeared like any other newlyweds. They checked into hotels, shared meals, and took photos at tourist spots. Emily posted on social media, writing about how much she loved the scenery and how happy she felt to finally travel abroad. Friends back home left comments congratulating her and wishing the couple well. From the outside, everything seemed normal. They visited historic towns, took boat rides, and tried local food. At restaurants, Emily chatted with staff, while David often remained quieter, focusing on the meals or checking his phone. Still, there were small signs of unease. In private, David sometimes acted distant. Emily noticed that his mood shifted quickly between moments of warmth and periods of silence. She hoped it was only stress from traveling or being in an unfamiliar place. As far as she knew, they were still beginning their married life together, and minor tension was natural. During the first week, they stayed near Zurich before moving on to Lucerne. They visited the famous wooden chapel bridge and walked along the lakefront. Emily took many photos, smiling against the backdrop of the Alps. David joined her but did not always appear enthusiastic. At night, they had quiet dinners, but conversations were sometimes brief. Emily tried to ignore her concerns. She had waited for this trip for years and wanted to believe it was everything she imagined. To her, this was a chance to make lasting memories with the man she had chosen to marry. By the end of the first week, however, the atmosphere had grown more complicated. David seemed restless and distracted. He sometimes avoided answering Emily's questions about the future, such as where they would live long-term or whether they should plan for children. Emily noticed his hesitation but continued to reassure herself that time would help strengthen their bond. The second week of the trip began with travel to Interlaken, a scenic town surrounded by mountains and lakes. Here, the couple checked into a small hotel known for its quiet atmosphere and views. Emily appeared happy, writing to a friend that she felt lucky to wake up every morning and see the Alps. But behind these messages, private conversations between Emily and David were becoming more strained. Emily wanted to talk openly about their relationship and her hopes for the future. David, on the other hand, grew more reserved. At times, his frustration showed in his tone or his silence. Emily sensed that something important remained unspoken, though she could not yet understand the full reason. To those around them, nothing seemed unusual. Other hotel guests noticed them as a quiet couple who kept to themselves. They were polite at breakfast and friendly when checking in and out of places. But inside their room, tension was growing, setting the stage for events that would soon unfold. At this stage of their honeymoon, no one could have predicted the tragic outcome. For friends and family at home, Emily and David were simply another married couple enjoying Switzerland. Yet beneath the surface, cracks in their relationship were becoming harder to ignore, and the trip that was meant to be joyful was moving toward a darker turn. The turning point of the story began quietly. It happened not in public but during private conversations between Emily and David inside their hotel room in Interlaken. At first, these conversations seemed like ordinary discussions between a newly married couple. But slowly, the subject matter shifted to topics that exposed a gap between them. Emily had always hoped to build a future without hiding her past. While she did not speak about it openly to strangers, she trusted that her husband understood and accepted her identity. Yet, during their second week in Switzerland, she noticed comments from David that made her uneasy. He sometimes asked questions in a way that felt sharp, as if he was testing her answers. One evening, after they returned from a walk near the lake, David confronted Emily more directly. His tone was calm at first but firm. He asked about her past in a way that suggested doubt. Emily, who believed she had been honest enough from the beginning, tried to reassure him. She explained again who she was, how she had transitioned years earlier, and why she wanted nothing more than a normal life with him. David listened, but his expression grew tense. He pressed for more details, asking about things she had not expected to discuss again. Medical history, early life, and personal matters she rarely shared. Emily answered as best she could, though she felt hurt that her husband was bringing up these questions after their marriage had already taken place. That night marked the start of a heavier silence between them. Emily noticed his distance growing. He no longer showed interest in planning the rest of the trip, and his responses became shorter. She tried to keep the mood light by suggesting new places to visit, but his lack of enthusiasm worried her. The following day, while visiting a small town nearby, tension resurfaced. They had lunch at a cafe where Emily seemed cheerful, taking photos of her meal and the view outside. David, however, barely spoke. After they returned to the hotel, another conversation turned into an argument. David accused Emily of not being fully honest before the marriage. Emily defended herself, reminding him that she had never intended to hide her identity. She explained that she had shared enough about her life, and if he had doubts, he should have raised them earlier. Her voice was calm but strained. For Emily, the conversation was painful but necessary. She wanted to clarify that her past did not change who she was now. For David, however, the discussion seemed to deepen his frustration. He repeated that he felt deceived, that he had expected a different truth. His words revealed disappointment, and perhaps a sense of betrayal. From this point on, the honeymoon no longer carried the same atmosphere. Days that were supposed to be filled with sightseeing turned into long silences or short exchanges. Emily tried to remain positive, sending messages to friends that everything was fine, but inside the relationship, tension was building steadily. Several days later, during a quiet evening in the hotel, the conflict escalated further. Emily brought up her hopes for the future, buying a home together, possibly adopting children, and building stability. She wanted to reaffirm her commitment. David's reaction was not what she expected. Instead of encouragement, he responded with frustration, questioning whether those dreams were realistic. The conversation quickly turned emotional. Emily insisted that she was the same woman he had chosen to marry, while David argued that he had been misled. Their voices rose, but since they were in a private room, no one else noticed. What made this moment critical was not only the disagreement but also the shift in tone. David's words no longer sounded like simple doubts. They carried anger. Emily, feeling hurt and confused, tried to calm him by reminding him of their love and the promises they had made. She said softly, "We are already married. This is our life now. Please don't see me as someone I am not." But David remained quiet for a long time after that, giving only short responses. His silence left Emily anxious. She did not know what he was thinking, but she sensed that something in him had changed. The next morning the atmosphere was heavy. They went out to see a nearby mountain village, but the day was filled with distance. Emily took photos alone while David stayed behind or walked separately. Observers might have seen them as just another couple having a disagreement, but the reality was far more serious. By the time they returned to their hotel that evening, Emily tried once more to reach out to him. She told him that she loved him, that she wanted to move past the doubts and start fresh. David, however, gave no clear response. His silence created a wall between them. This sequence of events, the confrontations, the arguments, and the growing silence, marked the beginning of the problem that would soon escalate. What started as a honeymoon trip filled with expectation had turned into a situation of mistrust. Emily wanted to believe that they could work through it, but David's behavior suggested otherwise. For him, the knowledge of her past had changed something in his perception of the marriage. What had been unspoken before was now at the center of their relationship. In the days that followed, the tension only grew. Each attempt at conversation led back to the same issue, and each silence seemed heavier than before. For Emily it was heartbreaking. For David, it became a burden he did not appear willing to carry. What no one around them could see was that this unresolved conflict would soon lead to irreversible consequences. The trigger had already been set: the discovery, the confrontation, and the sense of betrayal David carried. From this point forward, their honeymoon was no longer a simple trip, but the beginning of a chain of events that would end in tragedy. As the second week of their honeymoon continued, the distance between Emily and David became more visible. What began as quiet silences had turned into constant unease. Their daily routine no longer resembled the joyful trip Emily had imagined. Instead, each day carried the weight of unspoken words. At breakfast in their hotel, other guests noticed the couple sitting together but speaking very little. Emily would smile politely at staff, ordering food in a friendly tone, while David kept his focus on his plate. When Emily tried to make casual conversation about their plans for the day, David often responded with short phrases or a nod. This pattern repeated itself day after day, creating an atmosphere that was both tense and isolating. During outings, the difference in their behavior became even clearer. In public places, Emily took photographs, admired the scenery, and sometimes posted cheerful messages online. To her friends and followers back home, the trip still appeared happy. David, however, stood apart in many of the pictures or avoided being in them altogether. He walked ahead on trails, leaving Emily to catch up. When she tried to hold his hand, he sometimes pulled away. Emily grew increasingly concerned. She attempted to start gentle conversations about what was troubling him, but each effort seemed to return to the same subject: her past, her identity, and his struggle to accept it. She reminded him that she had not hidden her truth, that she had trusted him from the beginning. David, however, responded with resentment, saying he felt deceived. This cycle of argument and silence repeated itself in different forms. Emily pleaded for understanding while David withdrew further. In moments of frustration, his words became sharper. He accused her of betraying him, though she reminded him they were already married and had chosen to build a future together. Each discussion ended without resolution, leaving them more divided than before. Their tension also began to show in small, practical ways. When deciding where to eat, David often refused Emily's suggestions. When booking day trips, he showed little interest, leaving Emily to make plans on her own. She told herself that patience might help, but privately she felt afraid. The man she had trusted with her life seemed to be slipping away from her. One evening, after returning from a boat ride on Lake Thun, the situation escalated. Inside their hotel room, the argument turned more heated. Emily asked directly, "Do you regret marrying me?" David hesitated before answering, "I regret not knowing the full truth sooner." The word struck Emily deeply. She reminded him again that she had been honest in her own way, and that their vows had already bound them as partners. David's frustration grew and his tone hardened. He questioned their future together, doubting whether he could accept her fully. Emily, through tears, pleaded with him to see her for who she was now, not just her past. She said softly, "I am your wife. Nothing changes that." But her words did not seem to reach him. That night they barely spoke again. Emily cried quietly while David remained awake, staring at the ceiling. The silence between them had become more threatening than words. Over the following days, Emily tried different approaches. She suggested taking a break from difficult conversations and simply enjoying the trip. She invited him to join her for sightseeing, hoping shared experiences could bring them closer. At times, David agreed, but his distant behavior returned quickly. His anger seemed to simmer beneath the surface, waiting for another confrontation. Hotel staff later recalled seeing them together but described David as detached. One staff member noted that Emily often smiled and thanked them warmly, while David appeared distracted, sometimes avoiding eye contact. To outsiders, it seemed like ordinary marital tension. In reality, the situation had grown far more dangerous. The tension reached another peak during a visit to a mountain trail. As they walked, Emily tried once again to speak about their future. She asked him to remember the reasons they had fallen in love, to recall the happiness they once shared. David stopped walking and turned to her with a look of frustration. He said, "You kept this from me? How can I trust you?" Emily replied firmly, "I never kept it from you. You just never wanted to listen before." The exchange ended with David walking ahead, leaving Emily behind. She followed slowly, her heart heavy. She wondered if their marriage could survive the distance that had grown between them. By now, Emily's messages to friends had changed tone. Instead of cheerful updates, she sent short replies, saying she was tired or that the trip was more stressful than expected. She did not reveal the details, but her words hinted at trouble. Inside their hotel room that night, the atmosphere was cold. Emily attempted once more to reach out, telling David that she loved him and wanted to make things work. David responded with silence. The rejection left her devastated. The rising tension had reached a point where it no longer seemed possible to return to the joy of their early days together. Each conversation, instead of healing, deepened the wound. Emily's hope for reconciliation clashed with David's growing resentment. The pattern was clear. Emily tried to bridge the gap, while David allowed the gap to widen. What began as questions and doubts had grown into anger and distance. The honeymoon that should have brought them closer had instead revealed a fracture that threatened to break them apart completely. Unseen by those around them, this fracture was not only emotional but dangerous. The silence, the resentment, and the lack of resolution created an environment where conflict could easily spiral out of control. For Emily, the hope of saving her marriage kept her trying. For David, however, the weight of his feelings pushed him toward a decision that would soon end their story in tragedy. The final turning point came late in the second week of the honeymoon. By this stage, the atmosphere between Emily and David had grown tense and fragile. Days were marked by silence, interrupted only by arguments that circled back to the same painful subject. Emily still held on to hope, believing she could save their marriage through patience and reassurance. David, however, seemed consumed by anger and disappointment. On the evening of June 5th, they returned to their hotel after a quiet dinner in town. Witnesses at the restaurant later recalled that the couple barely spoke during the meal. Emily smiled politely to the staff, while David appeared distracted and restless. They left quickly, walking back to the hotel without conversation. Inside their room, the silence continued. Emily tried to start a gentle conversation, asking him if he wanted to plan something for the next day. David gave no clear response. She then spoke about her love for him, repeating that she was still the same person he had chosen to marry. She told him softly, "I want us to be happy. I want us to move past this." Instead of answering, David confronted her again about her past. His voice grew sharper as he accused her of not being truthful. Emily responded calmly but firmly, reminding him that she had trusted him from the beginning and never intended to deceive him. She said, "You knew who I was. Nothing I told you was a lie." The argument escalated quickly. David's frustration, which had been building throughout the trip, surfaced in a heated exchange. His words became harsher, and his tone carried anger that Emily had not heard before. Emily, shaken by his intensity, tried to de-escalate the situation. She reminded him of their vows and the promises they had made only weeks earlier. At one point, she placed her hand on his arm, saying, "Please, let's stop fighting. We can work this out." But her attempt at comfort did not ease him. Instead, it seemed to fuel his anger. The confrontation reached its peak when David, overwhelmed by resentment, lost control. What had been emotional conflict turned into violence. In a sudden act, he attacked Emily inside their hotel room. The details later revealed by investigators described the moment as swift and brutal. Emily, caught by surprise, was unable to defend herself. Neighbors in the hotel reported hearing a disturbance but did not recognize the seriousness of the situation at the time. Some thought it was only a loud argument between a couple. By the time staff investigated, the violence had already ended. Emily was found unresponsive. Despite efforts by emergency services, she could not be revived. The honeymoon, which had begun with photos and smiles, had ended in tragedy. Police were called immediately. David was taken into custody at the scene without resistance. He appeared calm but withdrawn, offering little explanation for his actions. The hotel room, once a private space for celebration, had become the site of a crime that shocked everyone who later learned of it. News of Emily's death spread quickly. Friends and family back in the United States were devastated. Many of them had seen her cheerful posts from Switzerland only days earlier. None could have imagined that behind those smiles, such danger was unfolding. The climax of the story lay not only in the act of violence itself but also in the collapse of everything Emily had hoped for. She had believed that love, honesty, and patience could sustain their marriage. Instead, her trust was met with betrayal and violence. David's decision that night ended their relationship in the most irreversible way possible. What might have been resolved through dialogue or separation instead turned fatal. For investigators, the case was clear. A honeymoon had become the setting for murder. The hotel staff, shaken by the event, cooperated fully with authorities. Police gathered evidence from the room, interviewed witnesses, and confirmed the sequence of events leading up to the tragedy. Reports later described the crime as the result of domestic conflict that had escalated beyond control. For Emily's family, the news was unbearable. They remembered her as hopeful, full of dreams for the future, and excited to build a new life as a married woman. The fact that her life ended not in her home country but in a hotel room abroad added to the heartbreak. The climax marked the point of no return. The questions that had lingered throughout the trip, about trust, acceptance, and honesty, were no longer subjects of debate. The tragedy had already occurred and nothing could change it. What remained was the aftermath, the legal process, the grief of families, and the lasting impact of a crime committed in the middle of what should have been a celebration of love. After Emily's death in Switzerland, the case moved quickly into the hands of law enforcement. Local police immediately secured the crime scene, gathered evidence, and took David into custody. The investigation confirmed that Emily had died as a result of violent injuries, and the primary suspect was her husband, who had been the only other person in the hotel room at the time. David did not resist arrest. Witnesses later reported that he appeared quiet and withdrawn, answering police questions with short statements. At the police station, he admitted to attacking Emily during an argument but offered little explanation beyond saying he felt deceived. His lack of emotion during questioning disturbed investigators, who noted his calm tone while describing what had happened. Because the crime took place in Switzerland, the legal process followed Swiss law. The authorities worked carefully, aware that the case involved international attention. Emily was an American citizen, and her family in the United States demanded justice. The U.S. Embassy was notified and remained in contact with Swiss officials as the case developed. The investigation lasted several months. Forensic teams examined the hotel room and collected all physical evidence. Hotel staff and nearby guests were interviewed. Records from the couple's travel, social media activity, and personal communications were reviewed. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. The argument between Emily and David had escalated into violence, resulting in her death. When the case went to trial, it received significant media coverage. Reporters described it as a tragic end to a honeymoon and highlighted the issues of identity, trust, and violence within intimate relationships. In court, prosecutors argued that David's actions were deliberate. They presented evidence of the couple's growing conflict, pointing to witness statements about their silence at meals, arguments in private, and David's visible frustration throughout the trip. The prosecution emphasized that Emily had placed her trust in her husband, only to have that trust violated in the most extreme way. They stated that David had choices. He could have sought counseling, ended the marriage, or returned home. Instead, he chose violence. David's defense team argued that he acted in a moment of emotional instability. They claimed he felt overwhelmed by discovering details of Emily's past and that he had not planned the attack. The defense attempted to reduce the severity of the charges by framing it as a crime of passion rather than premeditated murder. During the trial, witnesses from the hotel and forensic experts testified. The jury heard how staff had noticed tension between the couple and how guests had reported hearing loud arguments before the incident. Forensic evidence confirmed that Emily's injuries were consistent with a violent struggle inside the room. Emily's family traveled to Switzerland to attend the trial. They spoke about her life, her hopes, and the future that had been taken from her. Their statements painted a picture of a woman who wanted nothing more than to live openly and build a family with the man she trusted. Their presence in the courtroom added emotional weight to the proceedings. In the end, the jury rejected the defense's argument. The court ruled that David was responsible for intentionally causing Emily's death. He was convicted of murder and sentenced to a lengthy prison term under Swiss law. The judge emphasized that marriage is built on trust and respect, and that violence has no place within it. The sentencing brought a measure of closure to Emily's family, but it did not erase the pain. They returned to the United States with the memory of her cut short. Friends and supporters in their community held memorial services, remembering Emily as someone full of life and dreams. For David, the outcome was final. Instead of returning home to begin married life, he faced years behind bars in a foreign country. His decision on that night in Switzerland had ended Emily's life and destroyed his own future. The case concluded with a legal judgment, but its impact continued far beyond the courtroom. It raised questions about honesty, acceptance, and the importance of addressing conflict without violence. For those who followed the trial, it served as a reminder of how quickly a relationship can turn from love to tragedy when anger overtakes compassion. The tragedy of Emily's death left a lasting impact on many people: her family, her friends, and even strangers who only learned about her story through the news. What began as a celebration of marriage ended as a reminder of how fragile human relationships can be when trust and respect break down. For Emily's family, the loss was devastating. They had supported her throughout her journey in life and celebrated her marriage as a symbol of new beginnings. Her parents described her as a hopeful, loving daughter who wanted nothing more than to live freely and share her happiness with others. Her siblings remembered her as someone who encouraged them to pursue their own dreams. To them, her sudden death was not only heartbreaking but also deeply unfair. They returned to the United States with heavy grief, carrying memories instead of the future they had once imagined with her. Friends and colleagues also felt the loss. Many of them had followed Emily's honeymoon updates online and were shocked when the cheerful photos suddenly stopped. They spoke about her kindness, her creativity, and her willingness to support others. In their communities, memorials were held in her honor, allowing people to come together to remember her life. David's actions also left a permanent mark on his own family. Relatives who once celebrated his wedding now struggled to understand how it had ended in violence. For them, the trial was painful, as they saw a man they knew facing a long prison sentence. Some described feeling conflicted, mourning Emily's death while also grieving the loss of the future David could have had. The case also attracted public attention because it raised important issues. Many discussions centered on the challenges transgender individuals face in relationships and the importance of acceptance. Advocates highlighted that Emily's story was not only about one marriage but also about the broader need for honesty, compassion, and safety in all partnerships. They argued that love cannot survive without respect, and that unresolved prejudice or anger can lead to dangerous outcomes. For legal observers, the case showed the seriousness with which Switzerland treated domestic violence and homicide. The trial demonstrated that even in a foreign country, justice could be pursued and achieved. The cooperation between Swiss authorities and the U.S. Embassy also ensured that Emily's family remained informed and supported throughout the process. In reflecting on the tragedy, many people asked the same question: how could this have been prevented? Some believed that more open communication before marriage might have changed the outcome. Others argued that David should have sought help or ended the relationship instead of resorting to violence. While no answer could undo what happened, the case became a lesson about the consequences of silence, resentment, and the failure to resolve conflict in healthy ways. Ultimately, Emily's life was remembered for her courage, her kindness, and her dreams for the future. Her death became a warning about the dangers of hidden anger and the importance of acceptance in relationships. For her family, friends, and the wider public, the story carried a painful truth. Love must be built on trust, and without it, even the closest bond can turn destructive. The closing chapter of this story leaves behind both sorrow and reflection. A marriage that began with joy ended in loss. A woman full of hope lost her life far from home. A man who once promised to love and protect her now spends his days in prison. And for everyone who heard their story, the lesson remains clear. Relationships must be guided by honesty, understanding, and respect, because without these, the consequences can be irreversible.